Just when you didn't think inflation could go any higher, it has. Latest figure, inflation is now at 9.1%. The data just comes out in June. U.S. consumer prices jumping by 9% over the past year. Highest level in more than 40 years. It's like this has now become a recitation. It's the highest level until the next highest level, which is even higher. And in May, it was 8.6%. And economists thought there might be a small surge. They were predicting 8.8, but instead we have 9.1. 9.1. Now let's remember that just 18 months ago, at the end of the Trump era, inflation was 1.2%. Wow, what a difference. And how do you go from 1.2 to 9.1? You've got to do a lot of really bad and irresponsible stuff. And in a sense, it's almost a certain type of a feat to create so much harm in such a short time. And it's lasting harm. It's not going to go away overnight. It's going to be painful to wring inflation out of the economy. I'm not even sure there's the political will, at least not on the part of the Biden people, to do it. The average American worker has lost $3,400 in wages. So think about it. Even if you got a raise, was your raise 9.1%? Probably not. And so whatever raise you got, if you got one, has been wiped out, more than wiped out by inflation. And who did this to you? Biden, the Democrats. So that's who you have to hold responsible, because that's who is responsible. Now, for a little while, it seemed that, when people tell you to diversify your investments, they say always put some in stocks and put some in real estate because there's a certain amount of diversification. And that appeared to have a certain type of logic because stocks were falling. Stocks have actually dropped about 20% this year. And but real estate was doing well. It's kind of a seller's market. And particularly in areas like Texas here, real estate prices were rising. But now the effects of the economy are beginning to be felt even in the housing market. Here's CNBC headline: Americans are canceling deals to buy homes at the highest rate since the start of the pandemic. So all these real estate deals, which were kind of humming along, and are now suddenly in question. Why? Because people are saying, number one, interest rates are going to go up, and the Fed has made it pretty clear they're going to keep raising rates. By the way, that is one way to try to choke off inflation, but of course it's going to make it more expensive to borrow money. And if you're borrowing money for 10, 15, or 30 years, think of how much more you end up paying for a house if the interest rate is higher as opposed to lower. We've seen, of course, gigantic increases in the prices of fuel and gasoline, between 50 and 90%. Utilities, 38%. And even ordinary commodities are all up. Transportation, used cars, shelter, apparel. It's almost nothing. I suppose certain technological items are going down because technology gets cheaper over time. Now, it may seem that we are in the Jimmy Carter era all over again. Stagflation, slowing economic growth, combined with inflation. In fact, the slowing economic growth might even tailspin into a recession. The Biden people are trying to say that won't happen, but what's their record on economic predictions? It's abysmal. They've been wrong about pretty much everything. In other words, they've been trying to put a more glowing picture. Remember Jerome Powell, remember Janet Yellen. Oh no, inflation's going to be transitory. Oh no, it's going to get better very soon. Didn't get better. And finally, these guys admitted, well, you know what? We kind of misread it. We miscalled it. We didn't see the signs. And the signs, in fact, were there. Now, interestingly, when we turn to the example of Jimmy Carter, there are 2 points I want to make. And it may seem strange for me to say these things about Carter. In fact, Debbie is like, I would say, after Hugo Chavez, I think Jimmy Carter might rank, well, it's Hugo Chavez, Jimmy Carter, Obama, Biden, perhaps in that order. I might be getting it slightly wrong. Is that about right, honey?
Yeah, you forgot Hillary.
Hillary Clinton is in the mix. That's the five.
Yes.
Those are the five horsewomen of the apocalypse for Debbie. But with Jimmy Carter, two things do need to be said, and actually both are somewhat in his defense, at least in his defense compared to Biden. One, the problems that were caused for Jimmy Carter were to some degree external. Yes, he was a complete fool. Yes, he didn't know how to respond. But the oil shocks, remember, America in the 1970s was dependent on foreign oil. What makes today's situation so tragic is we're really not. We're able to generate our own oil, our own natural gas. We're blocking ourselves from doing it. So it's a self-inflicted wound. In the 70s, it wasn't. And so the combination of dependency on oil and second, the presence of an OPEC cartel, a newly formed cartel, gave Jimmy Carter some external problems that he had to deal with. Now, he dealt with them poorly. But one thing that he did do, which is a good thing, and in fact was then accelerated by Reagan, was he did begin a massive deregulation of the economy. And by that I mean deregulation of the energy sector, deregulation of banks, and deregulation of airlines. Let's remember that prior to Jimmy Carter, there was very heavy control of the airline industry, and there were very few airlines. There weren't that many, just a handful. You could pretty much recite the names of them all. Well, today you can't. Why? Because there are so many airlines. Well, when did all that start? It all started in the late 70s under Carter. Now, it was somewhat toward the end of the Carter era, but Reagan, recognizing that this is one thing that Carter did right, picked up on the deregulation and accelerated it. And so even though Reagan is credited with deregulation, it must be said that it did begin under Carter, was then continued by Reagan, and helped to produce the great economic boom of the 1980s and then the even greater economic boom of the 1990s. The point being here, not that Jimmy Carter was a good president. He was one of the worst. But nevertheless, even he looks good compared to Biden.